So let's talk about the attitudes towards integration, because I noticed upon the Brexit referendum and the subsequent events that coming from the European high-ups, this was used as justification for further integration, which was frankly one of the reasons I think the British public voted to leave. The constant creep of ever closer union. Is that still carrying on?
Absolutely, and I think it's accelerating.
Hmm.
Uh, I I was very impressed, I think, with the fact I followed it very closely. I was still living in the UK at that time. I was an academic and doing some work at the bar. I'd previously worked as an advisor at the House of Commons. Now, I was very impressed with the debate preceding the actual referendum. Now, of course, there were false claims on both sides. I think that's fair to say. On the other hand, I think I was extremely encouraged by the fact that those topics are regarded as crucial here, namely sovereignty, competence, creep, whether the European Union would ever be content to stand still, as well as migration and perhaps the question of the euro opt-out. These topics were widely discussed, and I think it was very encouraging to see that relatively complex phenomena like the role of the judiciary in changing law through the back door by means of judicial interpretation, these were things that were discussed quite openly in considerable detail and to a high level of maturity here. I don't think that they're being discussed.
So it didn't feel like that at the time.
Compared, I think it's got to be comparative.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's much more discussion in this country, or let's not be too sweeping. There was much more discussion about a complex political phenomenon before the Brexit referendum than I've seen in this country at any other time, and that I've seen in Europe, full stop, on anything.
I have to say, whenever I see European political debates, I'm honestly staggered by how one-sided they are.
Indeed,
it's
actually not really a debate.
No, it's a form of public flogging, generally. And it's quite embarrassing to watch because there's the politically correct narrative and the bad person.
Yes.
And you can tell that the left-wing advocates are trying to make it that. But thankfully, the more conservative-minded people in this country have got their wits about them enough to be able to resist it.
Yes. Fairly. I mean, I think it's important to bear in mind, though, that there's political correctness in this country too.
Oh, yes.
It can stifle debate too. However, I think the great difference between Britain and most of the EU, perhaps there are one or two exceptions such as Denmark, possibly to some extent the Eastern European states, but the main difference always been that in Britain, being pro-EU was not a compulsory part of the canon of political correctness, whereas in most of Europe, and most certainly in Germany, it is.
I mean, that was most exemplified by Jeremy Corbyn, who for his entire life was a very politically correct man and ardent Eurosceptic. So I think that's a very, very good point, actually. So with this closer integration, what are they actually demanding? What are they requesting?
I'm a parliamentary delegate. I mean, I think about a tenth or so, or maybe a 15th of all the members of the European Parliament are also delegates to a process known as the Conference on the Future of Europe that's been going on for something like 3/4 of a year. No, actually, probably a year now. It was convened by Ursula von der Leyen, the German Commission president. It's supposedly a bottom-up exercise to allow European citizens to express their views on the EU's current problems, possible solutions, and more generally, the direction it should take in the future. Now, in reality, it's a mere semblance of democracy. It's got nothing to do with democracy. There's an online platform where people can make comments, and then they have so-called citizens panels. If I recall correctly, there are 4 such panels with about 200 citizens each. Almost all of these are pro-European. Now, fair enough, there's a bit of self-selection. Clearly, if you have an EU-led exercise, the people who are likely to participate are more likely to be integrationist. Fair enough. So I'm not saying it's wholly been manipulated. Nonetheless, I asked my office to do a study of this, and the results were astounding. We looked at the number of citizens participating in the first plenary session. That's another medium of that conference. It's basically 2 days of debate between MEPs, national parliamentarians, commission officials, and a few citizens. So not all the 800 citizens are present there. There are panel members, but then a few of them also participate in the plenary. On this occasion, on the occasion of the first plenary, it was 27. And we discovered that 15 of those 27 were working for NGOs that were in one way or another either very closely associated with the EU, financed by the EU, and in any event, very pro-EU. In addition, there were 3 people who held Jean Monnet lectureships and professorships teaching various aspects of European integration or economics or law in a way that's sympathetic to the idea of European integration, where that's 18 out of 27. Then we had an MEP and another veteran EU associated bureaucrat, where that makes 20 out of 27. That's well in excess of 2/3 being firmly aligned with the EU. And so it wasn't very surprising that no Eurosceptic positions were expressed by the citizens. So that's in terms of the basic setup. The key here is it's presented as a quasi-democratic forum for making recommendations about the way ahead for the European Union. But the reality is that it's all hand-picked, predictable, and it's not at all representative. The second, if I may, a second aspect of, I think, an adequate answer to your question is really, what are they recommending? Well, they're recommending more European democracy. That means that more powers are removed from the nation states and given to the European center. We all know that the larger the entity becomes, the less democratic it is likely to be. Then they propose a lot more migration, and as the relevant European Commissioner Ylva Johansson said expressly, they want they want unskilled migrants, unqualified migrants, just as much as those who've got a few skills. Why is not entirely clear, but the level of qualification in the European population will certainly not rise as a result of that. I don't know what's the rationale behind it, because if modern economies need anything, it's not ever more unskilled labor. Well, there ought to be full-scale integration of the Eurozone, a kind of debt and transfer union, essentially one state with one budget. There should be the proposals for transnational lists to the European Parliament. That means that in future Germans, for example, the German electorate would not only be you are probably still aware the present system, it hasn't changed from say the time when Britain was a member. One votes for British parties, except that these parties are not represented and don't go to Westminster. They form part of the European Parliament in Strasbourg and Brussels. But you have actual British parties there, and these then form coalitions with other like-minded parties abroad. So that's the setup so far. That's not as clear-cut as national politics, but it's still vaguely comprehensible to people. No, but in future, there should only be an increasing number of MEPs should be elected as representatives of so-called European parties. These already exist. No one knows them. But it does mean that, for example, in Germany, people would in future not necessarily be voting for a member of the CDU, the FDP, the SPD, or my party, the AfD. They would be voting for European parties, vaguely called the People's Party or the Democratic Party or Identity and Democracy in our case. Fine, they give you some idea of what they're about, but then they may be voting for a Bulgarian representative of that party in Germany. Well, I didn't see the point of that. So there will be more and more alienation, disconnection between electorate and those representing them, as if that disconnect wasn't already very large.
I suppose that makes me wonder what the, I was going to say defection by Britain has done to the Eurosceptic cause in Europe. It can't have helped, right?
I'm afraid that's true. I mean, I myself, I am German. I have been living here in Britain for a long time. I'm not English or British. I'm simply an Anglophile. I think that's the way to put my attitude, best put my attitude. But if I tried to look at the matter, Brexit, the issue, from a UK perspective, I was always very enthusiastic. I was convinced well before the actual referendum, and before it became clear what would happen, that it would be the right course of action, because whatever the European Union will do, it will not be sensible, and it will not be what the British people want. So I think from a British perspective, I think it was the right decision. However, now that I'm representing Germany, and whilst I had some hopes for us when Brexit happened, I think it is fair to say that it's not given us all that much encouragement. Yes, there is the positive example, I think, of Brexit, but the propaganda is so relentless, the steamroller so powerful, that I think it is probably more difficult nowadays to argue the case than it was before. Paradoxically, I think because the situation has got worse, the European Union is presenting itself increasingly as a kind of victim, a kind of a tortoise on its back, let's say the victim of great calamitous events.
Right.
And therefore things are getting worse and worse, and we cannot expect them to get really better. However, whilst no one knows the solution, that's a standard pattern, everyone's wringing their hands, no one knows what to do, they only know one thing: we need more Europe.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.